I suspect that almost everyone intuitively understands the visual of being pierced through the heart with an arrow, and today I wanted to try and talk about that as clearly and directly as possible. And in my way of thinking, this applies in parallel to both spirituality in general and also romantic sort of love. The two, of course, being extremely interwoven and very closely related. So, I think we can all realize that most human beings, most of us, operate in life by living from the mind, thinking a lot, plotting a lot, playing a lot of games, and in general, that whole process is kind of unpleasant and maybe even stressful. And just intuitively, we know that we actually want to live from the heart. We've maybe had experiences in life where we feel like we're living from the heart, and then there's an effortless flow. Life seems really fulfilling, and we know intuitively that's what we want, and we don't want to be so stuck in the mind and all the games it plays. Instead, we just want to be free and liberated and be animated through the energy of the heart. So that's why we want to get in touch with the heart. But let's feel a little bit into what is it like to be pierced through the heart with an arrow. Can we clarify that a little bit better? Now, I hope I don't scare people off with the Sanskrit language here. I want to introduce a new word. It's a word that I've discovered in sort of the last year, and I think it's such a fantastic word that everyone that's interested in spirituality should know about. And I came about this in a very famous book called the Yoga Sutras by Patanjali. It's very, very famous in Hinduism. And there's a word called Nirodha. And what this refers to, in my way of thinking, is like a pinpoint black hole into the void. So if you focus on a point, wherever your point of focus may be, in this particular case, if you're focusing at the heart, you notice that there is a point there and energy goes out of that point and flows into the point. But as you, through consciousness, pierce directly at that point more and more and more and more, what you discover is there's like a pinpoint, a tiny, tiny little hole that actually goes to this infinite void space, which mystics all around the world for thousands of years have had a really tough time describing that sort of void state place in the English language or in any language, because it's such a paradox of words that come to mind. It's completely empty, but so rich and dense. It's so much love there, but so much emptiness. It's very mystical there. It seems to be a lot of power there, but also a lot of humility. There's so much love and compassion there and a lot of selflessness. But I guess that's a topic for another day. Maybe you can just intuitively understand that at the center of the heart, there's like this pinpoint black hole that goes to a vast empty void. Now, once this becomes sort of a regular experience that you can access through daily sober meditation, you focus on it and you experience this pinpoint black hole, it is like you can notice the mystical energies flowing from there and back to there. And the impulse for the human mind, remember earlier we said that most human beings tend to operate from their mind. And I'm including myself in that description. So the impulse of this monkey mind is to try to metaphorically stick your hand through that pinpoint black hole and manipulate reality. Try to get what you want through accessing that deep aspect of reality, that mystical aspect of reality. But that's the impulse. The actual thing, if you want to get in contact with love, is to invert that process. Because if you try and stick your hand through the pinpoint, usually after not very long at all, it will close back down, because this pinpoint is widened through love in general, and manipulation is not congruent with love. So instead of trying to stick our hand through this pinpoint and manipulate reality, instead we want to, almost metaphorically speaking here, allow the hand of God to come out from the pinpoint and animate our body. Let the energy of the void come through the pinpoint, through the Nirodha, and animate us. And this is kind of scary for the human being, because that process of allowing God to come through us, animate us, is dropping control. The mind has to drop control. It can no longer play its games because you're forfeiting all of that. You're surrendering all of that and just living from the flow of goodness, whatever that may be. And when you're really in the flow, it feels fantastic, but the mind can come up with doubts to kind of cut off that energy, because there are maybe two major reasons. The first is that we have fears. So for instance, maybe this goodness aspect of you is sort of flowing you towards speaking in public, but the ego might have a fear of speaking in public about topics that it's not comfortable speaking about, that might be socially risky to talk about, such as spirituality or God. So then the mind tries to shut off this Nirodha, this pinpoint energy, because it would rather live in safety than face this fear of public speaking. But it can be all sorts of fears. The mind finds it very difficult to trust this energy of the void to animate it. But that's the one thing that maybe stops us from being animated by this pinpoint black hole energy. The other is that we have desires. I've personally found this to be a big obstacle in my life, because if you really drop the mind and just get into the flow of goodness, the flow of love, letting love pour through that pinpoint and animate you, then it becomes scary that you might not get what you want. The mind comes up with doubts, questions, and asks, is this path that I'm following getting me my desires? Let's be silly and say you want a nice house. If that's your desire and you see that you're not directly making loads of money to buy a house, then the mind comes up with doubts, and then that doubt again sort of closes off that Nirodha, that pinpoint link to God, goodness, mystical, void reality. Okay, so we've just got on very abstract very quickly. I hope this sort of makes sense to some people. Maybe not. But I shall continue regardless, maybe for the few people that have some intuitive link to what I'm saying. So, yes, I don't think it's a good idea to try and stick our hand into this pinpoint, through this black hole, into the void, and try to manipulate things. That doesn't seem very congruent with love. But I have sort of discovered, many people have discovered, of course, that what you can seemingly do that is very aligned with love is to speak through the void, to sort of send your voice through the void and speak metaphorically with God. And in my own personal experience, when you're asking with a really genuine voice for guidance or for information, it's a really, really, really interesting process. It would maybe be a few minutes of speaking through the pinpoint Nirodha, and then because I'm accessing this Nirodha through the heart, then coming out of the Nirodha back into my mental space are all sorts of visuals. It comes through from the heart chakra, but from other chakras as well. A lot of visuals come, guidance comes. I don't have a man in the clouds talking to me, but you ask a question and then it comes up. You get really good answers that are extremely aligned with love. And that is really beautiful to me. That is, of course, you could describe that as praying, but the trick is not to ask from the ego, not to try and manipulate things. You have to ask with a really genuine heart and be prepared to get answers that say, your question is not valid. You're asking from ego. a lot of the times you might ask for something and the reply might be, surrender your attachment. Okay, so I think it is actually very good for us to speak through this Nirodha once we start to get access, because that can give us a lot of clarity in life. Sometimes, even if you can access this love state through this pinpoint black hole, it can be confusing, because what do you do then? Do you just sit around on your meditation cushion forever? Maybe you want to act and do something, but what is that action? So speaking through this black hole, asking goodness, love, how should I act? How should I be animated? That can really give you just concrete sort of guidance. And then you let the love flow through you to follow that guidance. So now I've already mentioned a few reasons why the mind sort of closes off this Nirodha, both because of fears and because we're stubborn that we want to get our desires met. Another reason for me, maybe the biggest reason for me, that I struggle to access this Nirodha link all the time is because I have this deep fear. Maybe fear is a big word, a dramatic word, but this big doubt that if I trust in this flow and I get let down, that will just be the biggest letdown ever. It's sort of, when you get this guidance from the love space, it almost feels like the biggest love story ever, like a really, really, really dramatic book or movie, and you feel so attached to your own life and what's happening, and it feels so beautiful. And if all of that comes crashing down, it would just, the fear is, the doubt is, it would undermine everything that the heart holds genuine and dear and valuable. So just for example, on the romantic side now, let's say you meet a partner, you fully give your love into that person. Love is just gushing, gushing, gushing. There seems to be a really powerful link. But then in a couple of months, that other person cheats on you, and it turns out that they were just playing you for money. It's just for a very obvious, simple example. That experience, it is so doubt-inducing, fear-inducing, because once you've opened up to love so much and then been betrayed, it scares the body to not open up to that love again. So I think for me personally, that doubt, that fear is a huge reason why there is this very big reluctance to actually, moment by moment, keep connected to this Nirodha space. Okay, just to get a bit personal then. But let's also now just take a step to the right and talk about the contrast between power and love. Ultimately, when you're accessing this Nirodha state, it's I didn't plan out this section of the talk maybe properly. Now I have to explain it on the fly. As you're approaching these states, you're also accessing a lot of power and just a lot of consciousness. You can see the flow of the world quite clearly, and you can see opportunities for manipulation, for controlling things to get what you want. So I already mentioned, I don't think it's a good idea to try and stick your hand through the black hole, through the pinpoint Nirodha, to manipulate things on a mystical dimension. But then also, just on the physical dimension, you could maybe see opportunities to get what you want by manipulation, just a little tweak of a knob somewhere. So for instance, in the romantic sphere again, you could see an opportunity to make someone that you're attracted to jealous, or you could sort of gaslight someone and make them feel ashamed, because if you make them feel ashamed, now they need your approval. And because the mind is just conscious and seeing how energy flows, the ego mind, and maybe the heart as well, they can just detect that here is an opportunity or a vulnerability in someone, that they can be controlled through these little tricks. And that can be tempting, of course, for the monkey mind, But ultimately, it's a question of love or power, love or manipulation rather. Do you want to consistently always stick to love, or do you want to get like corrupted and devolved into this manipulation game? And choosing love can be really hard sometimes because of the repercussions, because maybe you see someone and you approach them with sort of perfect love and you try to empower them rather than control them, and maybe you're attracted to them, but then they end up not liking you back and instead getting in a relationship with some douchebag or whatever that does manipulate them. And that can be hard for the heart to see as well, to see other couples or one person manipulating another. You can see that happening and you feel like it's just not right. And also you feel like you missed out, like you did the right thing, but you didn't get what your deep, deep heartfelt desire was. So this topic, as you can see, is a very vulnerable one, and the sense of disappointment again closes this Nirodha, this link, this wormhole to the other void dimension. If you see something like that, it's so harsh that you just want to close down your heart and just sort of slump back into reality. But the trick is to just keep that focus on the Nirodha. And if you do that, in my experience anyway, clarity always does come. If you keep that link with the Nirodha and speak through the Nirodha, then more information comes up from that love space and it sort of integrates everything again, and you can keep living from the flow of life. But that's not to say that it's an easy process. Okay, so now I'm getting to the end of this talk, and so far I've talked about things that I am somewhat comfortable in saying. They're somewhat solidified in my experience, but I sort of wanted to end on an open topic, some little tastes that I've been getting, some little glimpses. But I'm not talking about this with full confidence, and my wish is for some of you to experience what I have already, and then to go past that into what I'm talking about now and even beyond maybe. So the first is that although this Nirodha, it can 100% happen just through sober meditation by yourself, like a monk. Many monks, or I've heard a few monks talk about these experiences, and it's well documented in the spiritual traditions, the sort of Nirodha experience. But also it's very common through romantic relationships. And there seems to be a great opportunity through romantic relationships, because if you imagine, again, abstractly, this pinpoint black hole, if you can find someone else, a loving partner, that's also feeling this from their heart, and you have two pinpoint black holes, it's like an energy loop. A wormhole can form from the void through your heart, through their heart, back into the void, and that's going both ways. And what makes this energy link so nice is that there is this huge passion energy, this huge fire energy. So if you can imagine on a really abstract level now, a normal sort of Nirodha, the normal pinpoint black hole goes from the source through you back into the source, but it may feel calm and collected, like an arrow shooting through the air. But when there's two loving partners involved who both have genuine willingness to offer themselves to the greater good, to the void, and to each other, then that activates a fire wormhole. It's like an arrow that's completely made of fire, and fire is flowing both ways through this wormhole. And what this does is it shakes things up. It has a reverberation quality to it. In the Christian tradition, this is quite esoteric, but there's a concept called transverberation, where it's almost like your whole being, on a very controlled way, in a very beautiful way, is reverberating like a bass speaker along this fiery wormhole, going from source, through your heart, through their heart, back into source. So that's a very beautiful sort of experience that I've just had glimpses at, but something I hope I can experience and taste and solidify more fully in my future life. Okay, but just I'll leave you with that sort of open-mindedness. To be honest, my mind is feeling at this moment too humble to make a sort of motivational comment to conclude this. I think this process is very vulnerable, and I want to acknowledge that if you're going to go through this, if you are going through this, feeling into the heart, acting from the heart, focusing on the heart, then it may be challenging. There may be disappointments, doubts, fears, anguish, all of that. It can just be good to acknowledge that what you're going through is normal and respectable, and the fact that you keep choosing love again and again and again, if there is a God, surely there will be some sort of karmic reward. But then again, there's also the other option that all of this is just another mental game, another layer of the mind's mental structure, some sort of mental programming that we have. But I think it is worthwhile to keep choosing love. On my deathbed, I would rather know that I didn't get into power manipulation games, that at every opportunity I had to choose love, I did. I always try to, or maybe you always try to empower people, get them attached to their authentic self rather than trying to just satisfy your own desires. So maybe that concludes on the concept of faith, faith being a nice concept again in Christianity, where on a mental level, everything I've said now, it is 100% true on a subjective level, but does it have a deeper truth? Is there really a mystical, karmic, godly aspect to all of this? And can we really trust in this? The mind honestly does not know. How could the mind know? The heart knows, but then we have occasionally these doubts about, is the heart deluded or is it right? And that's the concept now we're getting into of faith. Can we just, or should we, do we want to have faith that this process is deeper than just the subjective experiences? But either way, I know I am going to be choosing love. I hope you do too. If we all choose love, definitely the world will be a very, very beautiful place.